Hi, everyone. Thank you for registering and for attending today's webinar. A few folks are filing in, so we'll just do a couple of quick introductions before we get started. My name is John Grant. Again, thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your day to come today. The topic of today's webinar is how to troubleshoot slow logons on Citrix or VMware Horizon, as the screen would suggest. My name again is John Grant. I'm the Director of Product Marketing here at Goliath Technologies. I'm joined by my colleague and counterpart, Joe LaCalandra, who is a senior member of our client success team, who is on the technical side and focused on working with many of our customers. And so I'll lead things off, and then Joe will be covering some of the more technical items today. So again, thank you, everyone. Let's get started. So one last item before we get into it, a couple of housekeeping items. First, as we go through the session today, we really invite questions. You can submit those in the chat window in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. We'll try to address them during the flow of today's session, but if not, we have a section at the end reserved specifically to cover those questions in the hopes that we can make today's session productive for everyone on the call, on the webinar, excuse me. And then finally, there's going to be a recording of today's webinar available, which will be automatically emailed to you after the session today. So if you get called away, or if you choose to share the content from today's session, you have the ability to do so. Finally, before we get into it, there will be about in a couple of minutes, there's going to be a quick survey question, very straightforward, relevant to logons and the kinds of issues we're about to talk about. So we would invite everyone to respond quickly. It's not going to take a lot of time. And then finally, at the end of the session, there will be a survey. Takes all of about 30 seconds. So if you don't mind filling that out at the end, we'd appreciate it. Okay, that said, let's get into the topic at hand. And so the agenda about how, in terms of how we're going to talk about logons and explain how folks troubleshoot and solve long logons is by way of an example. Typically, those are some of the best ways to talk about troubleshooting and solving these kinds of issues is with a real production customer and a real scenario. And so we're going to start off by talking about what the challenge is and talk about a home healthcare provider and their challenges resolving long logon times. We'll talk about why the logon process is difficult to troubleshoot due to its complexity and some other things. And then finally, how purpose-built software is focused on, is needed to address these kinds of issues. And again, I'm going to hand it off to Joe, who's going to talk about his experiences with some of our customers, in particular this one healthcare customer, which is a good example. So let's get into it. So I'm going to hand it off to Joe, who's actually going to start off and talk about the challenge at this particular customer, and then go from there.
Thanks, John, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. And I'm sure that the discussion today will be relevant to most of you. This is obviously a very difficult thing for an IT administrator, and it's obviously made a little bit more difficult by the lack of tools that are available to you. So let's talk a little bit about the customer that we plan on discussing today, and sort of weave in the theme of the webinar, which is addressing and troubleshooting long logons. So this particular customer, home healthcare provider in the United States, has about 30 locations. They are using Citrix Zen Desktop, running on Citrix hypervisors to deliver their combined ERP and EHR application. And their real challenge and why they came to us in the first place is they have call center employees that use Citrix to schedule appointments for their patients, and with that, they assign home aides to these appointments all day long. And the challenge for them is because they're using Citrix, and because it was taking several minutes for them to log on, call center employees were getting frustrated, and it was negatively impacting their ability to give fast and efficient service to their patients and their caregivers. So the IT team, in response to this, was really struggling with free tools like Citrix Director to get real visibility into what was causing the bottlenecks in the logon process. And this eventually made its way to the CIO because it was having a major impact on the way they were actually doing business. So let's talk a little bit about why it's so hard to troubleshoot logons. We all know it's a very complicated process, and with that, as I mentioned, the IT admin is not receiving a lot of help in this area. So let's go over the reasons why that's the case. So, number one, the tools at your disposal give very little to no visibility into the logon process, which makes it very daunting for an IT admin when asked to validate and troubleshoot a user's logon. And with that, these tools are oversimplified. So when we actually do get data, it's a very simple approach, and we're not getting enough actionable items and pieces of data to work with. Number two, additionally, your efforts are very scattered. It requires having to work with multiple teams, perhaps. Maybe it's going to require you to start digging through event logs or other servers, manually logging into those servers, collecting files, and all these things are very time consuming. And as an administrator, it's not something that you want to be doing when you have so many other responsibilities. I know many of you on today's call, your primary focus probably isn't just taking care of Citrix or VMware Horizon. You have many other things that you want to adjust your time to. So in addition to that, shortage of data, there's really not little to no historical data available to prove an ongoing problem is happening and to actually fix it. And lastly, there's no way at all for IT to be proactively alerted of when there are issues, which forces you to be really and extremely reactive to user feedback. So those of you who are on today's call, we mentioned at the top that we were going to have a poll question. We're going to show you that to you now. I invite anyone that's on today's call to participate, and we're really eager to hear from you. Is this something that resonates with you? Have you been stuck in this type of situation before trying to troubleshoot logons? And if so, if it's yes, feel free to share with us in the chat if this is something that you've experienced.
Yeah, and if there was some particular area you got caught up. And the reason why we wanted to ask this question, besides the fact that it's the topic of today's session, is because so many folks have had to go through so many changes as a result of COVID, whether it means deploying a VDI environment for the first time and when maybe you were just doing published applications, or maybe it's just expanding a current environment and increasing the amount of users accessing that platform remotely. And as a result of that, there have been a lot of changes that sometimes impact the configuration and of your logon process, whether that be things from an Active Directory or group policy standpoint and things of that nature. And the reason we're covering this topic today is because we've gotten so many questions and requests from folks to cover this again, because it's at times when you're really changing the environment and making those kinds of upgrades, that logon times can tend to expand or change or become or grow, right? And so that's why we wanted to ask that and see if this is a similar thing that you have been encountering recently and where you've been stuck. And so it looks like we're getting some good input here. Oh, beautiful. Okay, good. Well, we were going to cover that anyway. So, okay, good. So why don't we continue on? Thank you, everyone, for your responses. We appreciate that. We want to make sure we focus on things that are actually meaningful to the kinds of things you're encountering. Now, Joe talked a little bit about the challenge that this particular customer was experiencing, but they are not unique. Many customers have had challenges in this area simply because there is inherent complexity built into Citrix environments. You have a multitude of different technologies that are interacting. You have 15 or more vendor technologies that have to communicate. And if you look on the screen, you can see a Citrix environment. You can see all the different variables that can that play a role or can impact a logon time. I mean, you have your users on the far left. They're coming in over the network, obviously launching a Citrix session that's traversing the infrastructure, and then you have all the underlying infrastructure components, systems, and underlying hardware, whether it's Active Directory, whether it's profiles, etc. And so in the example Joe was talking about, when it comes time to actually troubleshoot, in the example of this healthcare customer, when it comes time to actually troubleshoot where a logon or why a logon is slow, it could be any of the components that you see on this screen. And if you and without technology that gives you the ability to monitor all of these components and give you specific detailed information on exactly how each sub-step of the logon process is taking, it's going to be virtually impossible. And you're going to need that information both real time and historically. Otherwise, there's just too much complexity in order to reasonably hunt down these kinds of issues with any kind of consistency. And so as a result, to address these kinds of challenges, this inherent complexity in the logon process and with Citrix environments in general, it requires embedded software that brings embedded intelligence and automation to bear, and specifically to look for the underlying conditions and failure points that drive user experience issues, such as long logon times. You look on the left-hand side, you see a couple different general categories of user experience complaints. The middle one is the most pertinent for today's purposes, logon slowness, of course. And if you look on the right-hand side of the slide here, you see a number of different specific failure points and conditions that can cause issues and expand that logon time and cause delays. And so it requires, in order to be able to troubleshoot and effectively manage these kinds of environments, you simply need to get the right information, looking at the right specific underlying components, and pull that information forward in a way that allows you to quickly understand and troubleshoot logon issues, and hopefully actually be alerted to those kinds of things in advance. And so as a result, the solution, and what Joe's going to talk about a little bit more about in a minute, is how, in order to address these challenges, you have to do all the things you just saw on that slide. But ultimately, IT is trying to do the following three things: anticipate issues before they arise, right? Troubleshoot them quickly when they do, meaning you have the broad and the deep information needed to quickly troubleshoot a logon or other issue. And then finally, have the historical record to show and document both what logon times were beforehand, as well as what they were afterwards, so that you have objective evidence historically of exactly what took place, and you can show the results of your changes and of your troubleshooting efforts, and actually pass that along internally with objective data. And so with that, what we're going to do now, I'm going to hand it back to Joe. We're actually going to drill a little bit back into this use case, specifically around some of the specific logon challenges this particular customer was encountering, and what they did to address it. Joe?
Thanks, John. And as we talked about at the top of the call, this home healthcare provider, they were really in a tough spot. They came to us, they wanted to solve a very specific problem with logon duration that was impacting the way they ran their business. We mentioned in the first slide, logons were taking in excess of 2 to 3 minutes. Users were, getting up, taking a cup of coffee when they were trying to log on. It was really impacting the way they were actually trying to do their jobs on a daily basis. So they came to us, and within just a few days, we had our technology deployed. I think it took under 2 hours for us to actually deploy the technology. We discovered their entire Citrix environment, as well as the underlying infrastructure, and created intelligent monitors and proactive alerting. And in just minutes, we were collecting data and populating dashboards, reports, and we immediately began helping the IT team solve their logon problem, which we plan to show you as part of today's webinar. So what we are going to show once we actually get into the live environment, we're going to show you how this customer was able to use Goliath's product to identify and resolve the root cause of their logon issues. And I'm sure that those of you who are on today's call won't be surprised to find out that there wasn't a single smoking gun for this particular customer. Many times it's going to be multiple different issues that are impacting logon times. And what they learned very quickly was that there were two main issues plaguing logon times that were causing delays. And we're going to show you both of those on today's call. So number one, they were seeing consistently high resource utilization on both their hosts and their VMs. And number two, they identified a massive problem with group policy and drive mapping specifically that were causing huge timeouts and delays. We'll then close by showing you how the customer was able to use the free tool, the tools in Goliath, like alerting and reporting, to be able to prevent this problem from happening again in the future. So before we transition into the actual live environment, I just want to circle back real quick to a graphic that's similar to the one John went through just before. So this graphic, I think, does a great job of really demonstrating just how complex the logon process is and how many steps it takes before a user is actually handed off keyboard and mouse and can actually do their job on a daily basis. So you're seeing from left to right, you have your user. That user clicks on the workspace app. They get the storefront page. They then have to click on an application or desktop on that page. That then will select a delivery controller. Delivery controller selects a host. And that's really just the beginning of the process. There are 14 other steps before the user is actually handed off keyboard and mouse. And that's just taking a look at Citrix. This graphic doesn't even show you how Citrix is communicating with SQL, the hypervisor hosts, as well as the domain controllers that are running Active Directory, authenticating the session, group policies, user profiles. So really, what could go wrong, right, in all these different situations? So it's actually, in my opinion, it's a minor miracle that most times this process can occur in less than 20 or 30 seconds, which is really the industry standard. So if you're an administrator on this call who's struggling, with many you've said in the poll, you're struggling with, trying to troubleshoot long logons, don't feel bad. However, we can help you, and which is what we plan on showing today. So let's actually transition into the live production environment. You should all be able to see this. And what you're looking at here is our Citrix virtual apps and desktops session display, where this particular customer, once we've identified and discovered their entire Citrix environment, they're able to see all of their user sessions, both real time and historically. Again, point that out. Not only are we getting real-time data, but we're keeping it historically. We're not averaging, touching the data, or rolling it up at all. They're able to see all of their users, the servers that those users connected into, the time, the date, and we're able to see user experience metrics like logon duration. And they're able to come to the screen here and quickly sort and find the users that are experiencing the longest logons. Now, you're seeing in this environment now, most of this is pretty green. And again, the embedded intelligence technology is pointing that out, that anything under 45 seconds is considered by industry best practices a good logon. We're really just seeing one that's lengthy. Now, this was not always the case with this customer. I actually want to show you all a quick screenshot, if I can, of what this customer was looking at before they purchased Goliath. And you can see here on this screenshot that they were looking at logons in excess of 150, 200 seconds. So you can imagine how difficult it was for this customer before they actually started using Goliath's data and started using the product. So let's actually take a look at an example here using what we have in our lab right now, and click on a user session and take a look at our dedicated logon tab. And this is the most comprehensive logon duration drill down in the marketplace. Those of you who are familiar with some of the tools that are available to you from Citrix, like Citrix Director, or if you're on the VMware Horizon side, maybe vRealize, there's no one else that's able to give as much information as we can about the logon process. So in the previous slide, we talked about how the delivery controller plays a big part on how it communicates back and forth with receiver before handing off keyboard and mouse. Well, you can see all of those steps here and how long each one of them took. So on the delivery controller side, if you're looking on the left side of the screen, you can see all of the delivery controller stages and how long each one took. So you can see, take a look at drive mapping on the delivery controller, logon script execution, how long it took to create the session. On the receiver side, you can see how long it took for the ICA file to download and how long it took for the connection to be established. On the bottom of the screen, if we move down, you'll get more high-level details as to how long the session host and client took to validate the session, the time it took for the domain controller to authenticate the session, group policy execution, profile loading, and interactive session. And what's really unique about this view is that nowhere else in the marketplace are you actually able to give details into both authentication and group policies. So from an authentication standpoint, we're able to show you what OUs each user was a part of, the domain controller that authenticated the session, and then from a group policy standpoint, we're able to give you details into each group policy that was executed on every user session. And again, this is really important, especially for group policies, because this is probably the most common place that we see slowdowns within the logon process, and it was one of the areas for this specific customer that they saw as an issue, and they were able to resolve it pretty quickly. So let's get back to the first point that we discussed with this home healthcare provider. And the first bottleneck they noticed when looking within our technology and looking at some of those long logons were large delays in both server and client validation, which we're seeing on this session here. So we can see at the top, the total logon time for this specific user was 35 seconds. However, 30 of those seconds were coming in these particular stages with server and client validation. Now, what is server and client validation? It's essentially a handshake between the server and receiver as they're trying to authenticate and validate and give the user keyboard and mouse. Now, a number of things could be impacting this, but was also quite apparent for this client was they saw really high numbers in resource utilization across the board for both the VMs and the hypervisor hosts in their environment, which plays a major factor in actually brokering and authenticating the session, which is why we were seeing high client and server validation times across the board for the specific customer. So what they did was easily navigate to the hypervisor host tab within Goliath, and right away they were able to see high resource utilization across the board, both real-time and historical sessions. Again, emphasizing the point that they were able to go back historically and look at this data, and it was not touched at all, was an average or rolled up, and they were able to see consistently high memory, consistently high CPU and CPU ready for both their hosts and both on the app server. And they were able to use this information to talk to their CIO, and the CIO, and they recognized that these were legacy Zen servers, and they were able to use this information to actually get the funding from their CFO to replace those legacy Zen servers. And with that, as soon as they replaced these hosts, they were able to knock off about 20 to 30 seconds off the logon times on average. So a really big win for them. And again, justification that they were able to replace an old piece of hardware.
Hey, Joe, we have a really good question that came in, and I think it's a logical time to ask it because it was just about what you were just talking about. The question is, how am I supposed to know where to look, and what do all of the substages mean? What do the stages mean? I think they're referring to the details that you have on the screen, because I think there's a number of kind of very specific terms and things of that nature where it assigns the different logon times, right?
Yeah, you're right, John.
How did you know, for example, that as a result of that you would have needed to drill into the hypervisor hosts, just as an example?
So great question. And for those of you who are looking at these different substages on the delivery controller and Citrix receiver, don't be alarmed. Everything is defined right here in the technology. So if you're interested in what credentials authentication means, creation, startup client, where you're seeing higher values, all you have to do is hover over the specific data point, and you're going to get exactly what that means. Specific to the data below here with server and client validation, we have documentation right in the product that breaks down each of these and actually shows you how you can use the data to troubleshoot. And all you have to do is just open up a help article right on the dedicated tab that you're on. So we're on the logon duration tab here. I'm able to click on the help article, and we have a dedicated tab here that's going to define every part of this screen here and break down all the substages and tell you exactly how you can use that information to troubleshoot.
Oh, that's great. So it'll actually give you troubleshooting tips if certain substages are inflated or you're seeing delays. Okay, great.
Absolutely. You are not alone.
Right. The other thing too, I think that should be noteworthy is that we also will actually train you on how to use it as well. I think that's probably pretty noteworthy. We have another quick question, and then I'll give it back to you, Joe, to continue. The question is, it looks like client and server validation exceed the total logon time. Oh, I see. Okay, 30, because the total logon time here is 35 seconds, and then it looks like. Can you explain that and maybe talk a little bit about the logon process and how that might look?
Sure. We talked about how complex the logon process is in the beginning of the call, and the reason why you're seeing a lot of these data points, and you could say, all right, there's 6 seconds here, there's 10 seconds here, there's 1 here, there's 30 here. Those don't all add up to 35. You're right, we agree. They don't, and the reason for that is that many of these different substages are happening at the same time. So Citrix is actually pretty clever with how they're able to, really, I want to say, make the logon process faster. So a lot of these different stages are going on at the same time, and having each stage and how long each one took, regardless of whether the times add up or not, is really important, because you're able to see if they're happening at the same time. And I think this Gantt or waterfall chart here in the bottom actually does a great job of displaying that. You can see that server and client validation are happening congruently. And with that, you're seeing a lot of these receiver and startups and delivery controller steps are happening at that same exact time. And then you're able to see how the logon process finishes with authentication, group policies, and then finally interactive session.
Got it.
Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's a good point, because in a situation like that, this kind of detail becomes even more meaningful in the face of a complicated, non-linear logon process, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, being able to see that illustrated is very important in my opinion.
Sure. Joe, that's all for now for the questions. We'll pick them up later.
Sure. Getting back to the customer and the use case. So we talked about, them being able to replace the legacy hosts was a really big win for them. It was able to cut down 20 to 30 seconds on their logon times. However, we touched about this in the top. This wasn't the only reason why their logons were over 200 seconds. There's very rarely a single smoking gun. And without the full picture and without the data historically, you'll spend days and even months trying to find answers. However, within our product, this customer was able to identify a major misconfiguration in group policy that turned out to be the biggest issue for them. So we mentioned how Goliath's the only product on the marketplace that not only shows you how long group policy execution took for each user, but how each policy show each policy and how long each one took within that process. And any of you who are on this call, you know that group policy is a very powerful tool, but it can be really easily misconfigured or very easily to make accidental configuration changes. So with this, we very commonly see slowdowns within group policies in the logon process. So with this specific logon, we're only seeing about 1 second in group policy, so that's pretty great. So I actually want to show you a screenshot that we took from this specific customer, who they were nice enough to share with us for the purposes of this story. So what you're seeing here is a screenshot from the actual customer, 288-second logon. That's a pretty long time. They were able to identify right away that profile load was accounting for 188 of that time. And then they were able to come down and see that group policy execution was taking 190 seconds worth of the logon process. And they were able to see this across the board. So it wasn't just one user. They were able to go back historically and see that this was happening, to many users, and it wasn't just a one-off thing. And you can't really do that without the historical data. So seeing 190 seconds on group policies is great, right? You can probably see that in Citrix Director too. However, what's unique about our technology, again, is they were able to open this up and they were able to see that a specific drive mapping policy was incorrectly mapped. And upon seeing this data, they were able to point the finger actually to a file server that they had decommissioned and they had never fixed the mapping on the policy, which was creating large delays in the logon process like we were seeing here. So this is a really quick and easy fix, which saved them, upwards of 175, 190 seconds on average of their logon process. So I'm actually happy to report that this specific customer went from seeing logon times, north of 200 seconds to at now, like we were showing you before, the majority of their logon times we're showing here are in the 20 to 30 second range. And again, they weren't able to do this without having that historical data. I really want to emphasize how important it is to have these sessions that are historical. The details are kept intact. They're not rolled up or averaged. And without these details, you can't troubleshoot and put the right fixes in place. So the details in this situation were really the only thing that allowed this customer identify a pattern and a problem with this group policy, and this, helped them resolve it and obviously help prevent tickets from coming in the future. And with that as well too, John, I think it's a good transition to talk about how this customer was able to use some of the data analytics and reporting within our product as well too, which helped them again track these type of data points long term and put fixed actions in place.
And Joe, in this case, I mean, they can find out what their logon times are just by opening up Director, right? So when it comes to the historical tracking, what was it about the tracking that was so useful for this customer? Because they could already know what the net logon time was in the tools they have already, right?
Absolutely, you're right. I mean, it's great to be able to see how long each logon is, or your average logon for a day or for a week. However, if you actually want to troubleshoot, you need to be able to understand what went into that logon process and that data below. So what they're able to do with our data and our reporting, obviously you can see it in the technology, but we're able to transfer those into some really great and really helpful reports to not only be able to track the overall logon times, but the substages of the logon process, logons by application, to understand where their bottlenecks were. So again, without that historical data and having it untouched and being able to see the substages of the logon process, this customer would not have been able to achieve what they achieved.
So these really cut up the logon times and present it on a global basis in a number of different ways, right? It looks like we have the average times for different sub-steps or parts of the logon here, if I'm reading that right in the first half. We have average times per application in the lower left. And then on the previous one, we did a similar, it provided a similar sort of view, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so is it just being able to keep track of all these details as time goes on so that you know where to focus? And is that better than just knowing the net logon time?
I mean, in my opinion, to really be able to understand what's happening with your end users, you need the most data possible. So being able to have the individual stages in one place in a report together with the overall logon time is incredibly valuable. Especially like you mentioned at the top of the call, things are changing on a daily basis. Upgrades are happening. People are switching which platforms they're using, and all of these things can impact user experience. So you need to be able to understand what's happening in the environment, and the only way to do that is with reports such as this.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm reminded of another customer as well, listening to you talk about that, that we were on with about a week or two ago. And for them, it was these were meaningful because they needed to have the ability to figure out which subset of their users was in fact experiencing long logons, if there were just certain applications responsible, and when they were having long logon times. We probably are all familiar with the term Logon Storms, right? And sometimes there are just certain times of day where you see it as an issue, and that can go a long way towards piecing together root cause based on what's happening at that time. Why are they all of a sudden spiking to 2 minutes at noon every day? So I mean, just listening to you talk about that, it reminded me of that customer. And I think we probably have a lot like that on our client achievement series page, right?
Absolutely. And I'm sure that, some of those in the audience today, I'm sure you could probably, relate to some of this as well too. I thought to share this quote that we have here as well too from the CIO, because he was the one that actually originally reached out to us from this customer. So you can understand when the CIO is reaching out to you, there's a big problem. And again, we were able to get our technology in just a couple of hours. And the team was able to start using the data to be able to troubleshoot very quickly. So instead of being reactive, they're now in a place where they can have proactive alerts and actually use the reports to potentially get ahead of these type of issues in the future. So it was a big win all around. And again, many of our clients, like John said, on this slide that you're seeing here, have struggled with logon times, and they've come to us and have had great success using the technology. So if you're in that boat as well too, and we already know that troubleshooting logon times are difficult, you're not alone. So many of the largest and smallest Citrix deployments or VMware Horizon deployments in the world use our technology. And really the main takeaway here is that the technology can scale, and then it also has a very ease of use and price point for small and medium businesses. And like John said, we'll train you too. So with that, John, I'm going to send it back to you for some Q&A.
Sure. We've got a couple of very good questions here that have come in that we've been sort of batching up over the course of the session. The first one is, are there any retention limits on the data being collected? I think historically. is what the
Right.
question's about.
There's not. So we give you the ability to keep the data as long as you'd like. But the technology has it a database, and as long as that database is resourced, you can keep the data as long as you want, and we don't touch it. We don't average. We don't roll it up, so it stays intact.
That was the next question. How do you handle the data and do you roll it up? So I think you kind of just answered that. Okay, so we can move on to the next one. Next question is, it says my logon times are okay. What about general slowness? And have you been able, so two questions. Have you ever been able to prove that a remote user's internet connection was the cause of slowness? So I think it's about in-session slowness in general versus just the logon process.
Sure. Yeah, we can address that one too. If you, I'll actually can flip back over into the technology. I think we'll do a pretty good job of illustrating that as well. So let's.
Yeah, and Joe, when you go back there, can you just quickly explain how all that data pulls into that one screen? We went right to the logon process because that's the topic today. But what exactly is being pulled together here? Because I think it's important for answering the question from our user,
Sure. So we're pulling data back through both our lightweight intelligent agent that would sit on your Citrix VDAs or your VMware VDIs in the Horizon aspect. And as well through our API with Citrix, and we're also bringing in the underlying infrastructure as well too. So it really is an end-to-end monitoring technology that doesn't focus on individual IT aspects, and stacks. It's really more focused on user experience. So we're able to deliver this to you in a single unified view here of user experience on a per user basis, and then as a whole as well too. And I think in a very user friendly way as well too. So the home Wi-Fi question that you brought up, thank you for whoever asked that, because that's one that we get a lot. And you can very, very simply and easily determine that a user's home Wi-Fi is the root cause by just looking at a couple data points within the technology. So first off, you can see the user's IP address. Very quickly and easily you can tell whether they're working at home from a specific location. You can also see how they connected into the environment. So again, if they connected through a NetScaler, you can tell right away that they're a remote user. And then once you determine that they're working from home, we have this very unique metric that really no one else has in the marketplace called connection speed out. And really what this connection speed out is the amount of bandwidth or the amount of connection that this user has from wherever they're located. So using the example here, a user's working from home. Most times people aren't plugging directly into their router, so it's going to be a Wi-Fi connection, and we're able to see exactly how much connection that user had from their home location. So in essence, exactly what Wi-Fi speed they had. So in the use case that we have here that I'm showing here, you're able to see from start to finish this user's connection, the ebbs and flows, peaks and valleys, and I can see that this user's connection at its worst was under 5 megabits per second, which according to our data interpretation lines in the technology is below what Citrix recommends. And in this case, we can easily point to the fact that around 1050, I think it says here, that they had a low connection. They also on that same exact time had a really high ICA round trip. So we can easily, in just a couple of clicks, point to the home Wi-Fi as being the problem.
So essentially, you can easily look at the round trip time and then the other things within round trip time that drive that, meaning the network latency piece of it, as well as the actual user's connection speed, that tell you where the slowness is and why. Is that right?
That's right. So network latency is going to give you the total impact of the network on this user session. So it's really important to understand if the network's the bottleneck. However, there are different parts of the network, right? So specific to the home user, that's why this connection speed is so important, because it will give you definitively the download speed for that user from their home. So in this case, like we were saying, the download speed took a massive dip from 32 megs to about 4 megs, which is when the user started having issues.
And we just got a question about baselines and thresholds, so I think it's a little bit pertinent to what you just had up. There were several lines on that screen that told you exactly what good performance would be, right? I would think that would be pretty helpful for folks that, especially ones that have little to no Citrix background, but have to be tasked to support a Citrix issue or user, right?
Exactly. Yeah. We don't expect, our customers to be experts. I mentioned before that you all on this call have many other responsibilities than just managing Citrix or VMware Horizon. So we build that embedded intelligence, automation, and baselines right into the technology. So when you click into one of these data points, like a ICA round trip or a network latency or connection speed, we're giving you the acceptable performance thresholds within the graph, so you can very easily see exactly what they are. They come shipped with the technology. You obviously can alter these if you'd like. However, they are based off of industry best practices. So not only are you getting them on the per user basis, you're also seeing them on this session view here as well too. So you can see how the colors dynamically update based on the baselines that are set within the technology. So I can see with this specific user, he had an 11-second logon time, which is good. It's green. However, his latency was almost 800 milliseconds. So that was why it's red.
The next question is, can you set a baseline on the expected logon time, what the expected login time should be, and then create notifications when logons start to consistently exceed the expected logon times?
Yes, you can. So I mentioned this screen here. You can set a baseline. However, you can also set up a proactive alert that has a threshold. So say your threshold is 60 seconds or 30 seconds. You can set up that alert to be able to notify you proactively. You can also report on how many times the alert triggers. So you have an understanding of how often you're reaching that or breaching that threshold. So it really, again, allows you to be proactive and be able to get ahead of things instead of just waiting for a user to place a ticket.
Good. You addressed this, I think you might have hit on this earlier, but the question is, how long does it take to actually install and set up the product?
It's honestly really easy, and it takes probably less for most customers, between 1 to 2 hours. I think for larger enterprise customers, probably closer to 2 hours, but anyone that's, SMB, we can get the technology installed, collecting data in just about an hour, hour and a half.
Yeah, a lot of folks tend to like that, right? Because of the embedded intelligence and automation and things of that nature. It's basically completely out of the box, right?
It's completely out of the box. It comes with the embedded intelligence. It knows what to look for. It knows how to monitor without any custom configuration on the customer's end. So it's essentially like adding a troubleshooting expert to your team within just a couple of hours.
It sounds like I could be a Citrix admin.
You know what? I bet you can, and same with me.
Okay, very good. That's all for the questions that we're going to take here today. Everyone, thank you for coming today, and thank you for your participation. Some really good questions got offered up there. I appreciate that. We kept Joe on his toes, which isn't easy to do sometimes because he knows his stuff. So everyone, if you'd like to learn more about the technology, obviously you focused on a very particular area today. Please feel free to send us an email at techinfo@goliathtechnologies.com or through the website. In the event you'd like a personalized demo, you'd like to trial the software in your own production environment or in a subset of it. We also offer troubleshooting services focused on solving issues like long logons or others. And there also are managed services available, which can take a number of different forms, just as a way of supporting our customers that want additional expertise and want additional tools to ensure you're able to manage and support the Citrix environment the way you'd like to. So everyone, please feel free to reach out. Thank you everyone for attending and for the questions, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. And reminder again, you're going to be receiving a survey afterwards. So please let us know how we did today. Your feedback's really important and obviously is implemented in future webinars. So thank you again.
Thanks, Joe.